Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world.
You ever feel like you're just stuck in a loop? You solve a problem, and then boom, it just pops right back up, maybe in a slightly different disguise. Or you make some big change, and for a little while it feels great, but then everything just kind of slides back to the way it was before. It's an incredibly common frustration, and it happens for a reason. We're often fighting the symptoms instead of understanding what's really going on underneath.
See, most of us are trained to think in terms of events. Something happens and we react. It's a very linear, cause and effect way of seeing things. But the world? It's rarely that simple, right? Systems thinking asks us to pull the camera back, to look deeper, and to see the connections and the patterns that are actually producing those events in the first place. This failure to see the feedback loops running just beneath the surface, well, that's really the heart of what we could call a crisis in perception.
So, to start shifting our perspective, we've got to get to the heart of it and ask a really basic question. What exactly is a system? A system isn't just a random pile of stuff. It's a web of interconnected parts, and they're all working together for some kind of common purpose. But here's the key, the real kicker. A system's behavior comes from its structure, the way all those parts are connected, not just from the individual parts themselves.
It's totally natural for us to focus on the things we can see. The players on a sports team, for instance, those are the elements. But the real power, the real leverage, it's in the parts you can't see, the interconnections, like the rules of the game, and the purpose, the goal of winning. You can have the exact same players, but if you change the rules or the goal, you will completely change the outcome.
Okay, to make all this feel a bit more real and a little less abstract, we're going to use one simple but really powerful metaphor to understand a core mechanism that governs pretty much every system you can think of, a boring old thermostat.
That thermostat on your wall, it's the perfect example of what's called a balancing feedback loop. Its entire job is to create stability, to keep the temperature from swinging too high or too low. It's constantly working to pull the system back to its goal.
So let's just walk through it. First, you set a goal, 70 degrees. Simple enough. The system then perceives the current state. Let's say it's 72 degrees. It detects a gap between where things are and where you want them to be. That gap triggers an action. The air conditioning kicks on. That action changes the state, lowering the temperature. And once the goal is reached, the action stops. This whole loop just runs on its own, constantly adjusting to keep things in balance.
And this right here is the crucial point. Nobody is standing there flipping a switch on and off, right? The system self-regulates. Its own internal structure, that flow of information about the gap between the goal and reality, is what governs its behavior. And that is a fundamental property of any stable system.
All right, now that we've got a handle on that stabilizing balancing loop, let's meet its powerful counterpart. This second type of loop does the exact opposite. It creates runaway change.
And this is the reinforcing loop. Honestly, the best way to think of it is like a snowball rolling downhill. A small change feeds back on itself and creates an even bigger change, pushing things in the same direction. It's the engine of exponential growth, but it's also the engine of traumatic collapse.
A classic example is compound interest. The money you have in the bank is the stock. The interest it earns is an inflow that increases that stock. But then that interest gets added back into the stock. So now you have a bigger stock, which earns even more interest. The more you have, the more you get. The whole cycle just accelerates and amplifies itself.
So this slide just nails the difference, doesn't it? Balancing loops are always goal-seeking. They try to correct things and hit a target. Reinforcing loops, they're all about snowballing. They just amplify whatever is already happening, for better or for worse. One creates stability, the other creates massive acceleration.
So, what happens when these simple loops start mixing together out in the messy real world? Well, they create these predictable patterns or archetypes that can trap us in cycles of behavior we really don't want.
The first trap is one that once you see it, you'll see it absolutely everywhere. It's often called success to the successful. It's basically a reinforcing loop where winning gives you the resources that make it even easier to win the next time around.
Think about a game of Monopoly. The player who gets a little bit of an early lead can buy more property, which lets them collect more rent, which they then use to buy even more property. That initial success kicks off a reinforcing loop that makes it almost impossible for anyone else to catch up. And that same dynamic plays out in everything from college sports to market competition.
All right, the second classic trap is escalation. This is what happens when two or more systems get locked into a reinforcing competition, where each one is just trying to get a leg up on the other.
So here, you've got two actors just reacting to each other. One country builds up its army, so its rival feels like it has to do the same, which then prompts the first country to build up even more. Or maybe two companies get into a price war, each one cutting their prices just to match the other. Each action provokes a bigger reaction, creating this powerful reinforcing loop that can spin out of control until somebody just gives up or goes broke.
And a third, really sneaky trap is called shifting the burden. This is when we rely on a short-term fix, a band-aid, for a symptom instead of digging in and addressing the root cause. You know, like taking a painkiller for a headache again and again instead of figuring out why you keep getting headaches. The quick fix feels good, but over time, it actually weakens the ability to find a real solution.
Okay, so we've got these loops and these traps, but how do they scale? This way of thinking isn't just for thermostats or board games. It scales all the way up, shaping our entire society. Check out how these systems stack on top of each other. It all starts with our individual cognition, the mental models we use to make sense of the world. Those models are shaped in large part by our education system. That shared educational framework then becomes the blueprint for our institutions, our governments, our companies, all of it. And those institutions in turn create the big economic and political outcomes we all have to live with. It's easy to see how a tiny flaw at the bottom can create massive cracks all the way at the top.
And this really brings us back to the central idea. The purpose of systems thinking isn't about finding some single simple answer. The goal is to achieve what you might call structural clarity, to finally see the hidden architecture of the systems all around us, to understand the feedback loops driving behavior, so we can start to intervene more wisely.
So the next time you feel stuck, the next time you run into a problem that just keeps coming back, I want you to ask yourself, what are the elements here? What are the interconnections? And what's the purpose? Are there balancing or reinforcing loops at play? What are the invisible structures that are shaping your world? Crisis in Perception examines how systems shape belief and how better tools help us see clearly. This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind Crisis in Perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon. For a longer, audio-based analysis of this topic, see the deep dive linked in the description. If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.